the principle of starch is the more you want something like cardboard, this literally feels like a sort of plastic, which is it was meant to. You had the option to do it like that. It feels like plastic. Basically, by the 1809, this thing of the starch really caught on and caught on. So the more you want it starched and to hold the starch and to feel like cardboard when it is actually not cardboard in the fabric, and you still want it to be a genuine fabric, it means you need the lighter the ply and the more plies, i.e. the more absorbent the fabric, like a very light fabric is more absorbent clearly, the more it will absorb starch. But if it is alone, it will be as starch as it can be, but it is simply alone, like that shirt. So it is still not, it feels a bit like cardboard, but not for very long, because, and not even as cardboard as that, because it is only one ply there. So the more you add plies like that, the more it will take, each ply will absorb starch, and the more they will laminate onto one another. And that's the same principle with the gossamer hat. The more you add gossamer, so gossamer would be the equivalent of the ply of fabric, and the starch, and the shellac for the gossamer hat would be equivalent to the starch in the shed. I.e. the starch makes each ply hard and also sticks each ply onto one another. And so now that cuff here, each ply is as thin as that, or almost, but now they cannot be to outstock laminated, it is called, onto one another, so I cannot take one ply away from the other, unlike when it was all smooth and unstarched. So back then it would not be super hard like that, because it had not come to that point. This would only be from at minimum the early 80s, it really caught on from the mid 80s, and then from the mid 90s they started even having 4 plies, and then alle colors were advertising a detachable color, which they said was the thickest color ever made with the most plies, and it was 5 plies. I saw this advertisement, it was from 1899, and I think just before, as with all fashions, it goes to a certain point, to the peak, and then it falls all the way back down suddenly. So just before the 1920 craze of having only a 2-ply unstarched color started, just before that I think they had some colors with even 7 or 8 plies, and obviously they were super thick, and they could not look thin, but they were super, super dense, because of so many plies. I'm really going off track now, so by the gangs of New York era, it is a bit odd, because my feeling is that, when I'm certain it is correct, they had these paper collars, these thick paper collars, especially the leading that had just been invented. They even had these thick, very, very hard steel collars. And basically, because most people started wearing those because they could not afford actual fabric detachable collars, even if they were removable collars, at least in fabric, they could not afford that. It, in a way, fashion, we say, comes from the top, but I think it more comes from the bottom. It reaches the top and then it falls back to the bottom, in the sense that this is how it went. The clerks, well, it started a detachable collar thing. You have to read it on the internet, I cannot explain everything, but the clerks, these were usually farmers, descendants of farmers, and suddenly they got an education, and for the first time they had to wear a white collar. So what would they do? They would go to detachable collars. Often they were very young bachelors, did not know how to do laundry. There was no running water back then, and laundries existed, true, but they did not have the time or energy, and it was just easier to purchase a cardstock collar. Because they were so popular back then, that was when they also invented linen, which looked more, because basically they were asking for something that would last longer, even if a little bit more pricey, last longer than simply paper, and look more proper, look more like an actual thing in a fabric that you had starched. And so they came up with a mixture of both linen, that I showed the detachable color already, which is 2 plies of starched linen, which imprisons a cardstock. So obviously it cannot be washed because you would ruin the cardstock inside it, but it can be brushed, and it will last at least 2 weeks, at least a week. Now, except if you run a marathon, it will not last just 1 day like the cardstock ones, which can last maximum. I created my own cardstock ones, and they last maximum 1 week and look absolutely disgusting, and start just breaking down. The buttonholes break, it's no longer buttons. So basically, all these clerks that were the vast majority of people in Suits. The vast majority of people in Suits were not working class, but were not even in Suits. They were just in their shirts and whatever, and did not even have a collar. And then the elite that actually had sewing collars, and or at least a removable collar, but in a genuine fabric that was washed and starched. Well, they were very tiny, the percent of that. So most of them in the cities were actually clerks, these sorts of middle class, like sort of clerks would be sort of upper middle class, but the very, very bottom of upper middle class, almost just middle class here. So they did really not have much money, and they were the ones that really pioneered fake shirts, i.e. detachable bosoms, cast and collar, as a big thing. Before that it existed already since the early 19th century or even before, but it was more of a dandy thing, i.e. a dandy as in somebody, a rare person, i.e. not very common, who do not have much money but they want to pretend to have a lot of money, so they cheat. But apart from those few, there were really either those that could afford an actual shirt with everything sewn onto it, like a sewn collar, sewn cuff, sewn bosom, whatever, or those that had a shirt with everything sewn onto it, but they were a farmer and their shirts looked like that and they did not care, even the collar might have been short to be more practical and all. So then the clerk started in the 1840s, even 30s, but especially the called on 40s, 50s, especially in America. And so America was really the country to create disposable things, as is well known. And they started that especially with the detachable collar, one of them first disposable things, and there were complaints that it was too disposable even. They came up with the lean, and so basically, because all these clerks would wear these very rigid, at first they looked rigid because they were, how shall I created that? All these collars are fake to some extent. These are made by me. This is pure cardstock, worn 2 weeks, no 1 week, and it looks disgusting. This is cardstock, new. 2 plies of cardstock, like we usually have done it, and glued. So really it's just one big ply, but then folded, before folded it, I put the glue, and some people also made them themselves, they had very few money, but usually it's a machine made by then. This is what it looks like after a week, because I really wanted to wear it for a week. Most of them were wear for 1 or 2 days max, because it already looks very disgusting. This is linen. So 2 plies of linen, or again 1 ply that they folded, imprisoning, laminating it, gluing it onto a cardstock. So this can last longer, and it looks way more real, because the linen on the outside, on both sides, is actually starched prior to laminating. See, it detaches there. This is starched linen, this is cardstock. This is starched linen again. And so this is what I'm touching literally is starched linen, but imprisoning a layer of cardstock. So stronger, more durable and better looking, more realistic looking especially than these I made myself, these cardstock. By 1862 most were cardstock, but still they look quite starched. Imagine this is, it looks more starched than that. Imagine this is fabric, you would think it is fabric like that shirt, it's very starched. The linen one looks even more rigid, more starched, more. So basically, because they were all wearing colors like that, or even the still ones, it became a fashion to have, step by step, because they became more and more popular, and especially by 1870 they created celluloid. So what are celluloid collars? They are a genuine collar like that. This is actually a celluloid collar. People think it is pure celluloid. No. Initially, when it was invented, patented in 1870, it was a collar that is 2 or 3 plies, whatever. I think the first ones were 2 plies because the fashion was for 2 plies only. They heavily starched, so it cannot look as heavily starched as that. But part of the process was to dip it in melted celluloid, and the factory processes dry it, and it waterproofs the collar. So then the collar, although the inside of it is starched linen or cotton or whatever, initially it was starched linen, it becomes waterproof, and it can last even if you wear it every day. It will last, I think, a year, and you can wash it, like you can dip it in a wash basin and scrub it with soap. It becomes completely waterproof. But do not boil it, do not put it in a washing machine. And you do not need to restarch it because it is entirely coated in a varnish of plastic, really. Like the same principle